The warning klaxons did not wail. They shrieked. It was a jagged, synthetic scream designed to tear
Your
through the
presence
calm
here
of
is
the
a
human
risk.
nervous
State your
system
purpose.
I am
and
here to
trigger
offer an alliance.
absolute
Our fates are
primal panic.
intertwined.
Show me proof.
Red emergency lighting washed over the cramped bridge of the Earth transport vessel, casting long, bleeding shadows across the faces of the crew. Outside the reinforced viewport, the dark void of the Kepler 7 sector was no longer empty. Space itself seemed to tear open as 32 massive hegemony warships dropped their active camouflage. They materialized like leviathans rising from black water, their hulls bristling with plasma batteries and heavy kinetic cannons. They formed a perfect, inescapable sphere around the tiny human ship. 32 capital-class destroyers against one unarmed diplomatic transport, a ratio of 32-1. It was not a standoff. It was an execution. On the main communication screen, the image of Counselor Vraex flickered into existence. His blue-scaled skin was draped in the opulent silks of the hegemony elite. Beside him stood Commander Kalar, a towering wall of biological armor and military arrogance. Vraex did not bother with greetings. He offered a timer. Large glowing alien numerals began to count down in the corner of the screen. 11 minutes and 30 seconds. That was the exact amount of time the human race had left to sign away 14 independent colonies. 11 minutes and 30 seconds before 340,000 human beings living on the frontier worlds would be legally reclassified as indentured biological assets. Slaves. If the signature was not provided, the transport ship would be vaporized and the orbital bombardments of the colonies would begin. Ambassador Evelyn Vance stood in the center of the shaking bridge. The artificial gravity dampeners were struggling against the proximity of so many massive alien warp drives. Her coffee spilled across the tactical console, dripping onto the floor. She did not look at it. She did not look at the 32 warships charging their weapons. Evelyn slowly raised her wrist and checked her analog watch, a gift from her daughter back in Washington. The leather was worn, the silver was scratched. It ticked with the steady, unstoppable rhythm of human time. She looked up at the towering alien commander on the screen. Her pulse was steady. Her voice was ice. "You think we came here in a transport ship?" The transmission cut. The screen went black. The silence on the bridge was deafening. To understand the weight of this moment, one must look back exactly 72 hours. The rain was falling hard on the concrete streets of Washington, D.C., washing away the grime of a city that had spent the last decade preparing for the end of the world. Evelyn Vance had been standing by the window of her suburban home, watching her 7-year-old daughter sleep. The child was clutching a stuffed bear, breathing softly, entirely unaware that the sky above her was a hunting ground. The encrypted message had arrived at midnight. Level Omega. Eyes only. It was a diplomatic summons from the Galactic Council, wrapped in the polite bureaucratic language of peace. But Evelyn had spent her entire career reading the shadows between alien words. The Council was demanding her presence at the neutral station of Kepler 7 to discuss territorial disputes regarding the new Colorado colony. They explicitly instructed Earth to send a low-profile civilian vessel. A gesture of trust, they called it. It was a trap, a deliberate, humiliating snare. The hegemony had spent 50 years subjugating young, naive species. They would invite their leaders to neutral ground, surround them with overwhelming military force, and force them to sign away their homeworlds. Those who refused were turned into cosmic dust. Those who agreed were sent to the labor camps. Evelyn knew the stories of Kepler 9. 2 years ago, a human mining outpost had been seized under the guise of temporary protective custody. 4,000 American citizens, men, women, and children vanished into the dark processing facilities of the hegemony. Smuggled footage had shown humans working 20-hour shifts in toxic atmospheres, their skin gray, their eyes hollow, coughing up blood, while alien overseers watched from climate-controlled perches. Earth had screamed for justice. The Galactic Council had formed a committee. Nothing was done. Now they wanted New Colorado. They wanted 340,000 more souls. Within an hour of receiving the message, Evelyn was deep underground beneath the Pentagon. The air smelled of ozone and stale coffee. Screens covered every inch of the war room, tracking the movements of alien fleets that treated human space like a safari. President Sterling had sat at the head of the table, his face lined with the exhaustion of a man carrying the weight of a targeted species. He did not ask for opinions. He gave an order. It is time to open the vault. Evelyn was transferred to orbital command above the North American continent. The station hung in the blackness, a cold metal eye watching the stars. Admiral Cassandra Steele was waiting for her in the hangar bay. Steele was a veteran of the Proxima Centauri massacre. Her hair was iron gray, her posture rigid. She did not smile. She simply gestured toward the launch bay doors. Evelyn had expected a monster. She had heard the whispers in the halls of the Pentagon about Project Vanguard. 10 years of secret funding. The complete redirection of Earth's heavy orbital manufacturing. A weapon designed to ensure that humanity would never again be hunted in the dark. But when the blast doors parted, Evelyn felt a cold knot of disappointment form in her stomach. Sitting in the docking cradle was a ship that looked entirely ordinary. It was gray, blocky, and small. Barely 214 meters long, it bore the standard markings of a deep space freighter. There were no visible weapon batteries, no heavy armor plating, just a battered, unremarkable hull that looked like it had seen decades of hauling cargo. "This is what is going to save us," Evelyn had asked, unable to hide the doubt in her voice. Admiral Steele stepped forward, her boots echoing on the metal grating. "Do not trust your eyes, Ambassador. The hegemony relies on what they can see. That is their greatest weakness." A man descended the boarding ramp. He moved with the quiet, deliberate grace of a predator, Captain Gideon Thorne. He was 42 years old, born on the Martian colonies, and he carried the cold void of space in his eyes. He had watched his parents burn in the atmospheric strikes at Proxima. He had not smiled since. He stopped in front of Evelyn and offered a crisp salute. His uniform was immaculate black and silver, devoid of any traditional military insignia. "Welcome aboard the Vanguard, Ambassador," Thorne said. His voice was low, a steady rumble that vibrated in the chest. Evelyn stepped onto the ship. The moment she crossed the airlock, the illusion shattered. The corridors were not the hollow, echoing tunnels of a freighter. The bulkheads were impossibly thick, forged from alloys she did not recognize. The air hummed with a suppressed, terrifying vibration. It felt less like a machine and more like a caged beast holding its breath in the dark. The crew moved with lethal efficiency. There was no casual banter, no wasted movement. These were not cargo haulers. They were the absolute apex of Earth's tactical command, disguised in the stained jumpsuits of mechanics and engineers. When they launched from Earth orbit, the transition into faster-than-light travel was seamless. No violent shaking, no engine scream, just a quiet shift in reality as the stars outside the viewport stretched into infinite lines of white fire. The journey to Kepler 7 took 4 days. 4 days of suffocating tension. Evelyn spent hours going over the colony reports, looking at the faces of the people on New Colorado. Families building homes in the red dirt. Children playing under unfamiliar alien suns. They had gone to the stars looking for a future. The hegemony was coming to turn it into a graveyard. On the bridge, Captain Thorne stood motionless for hours, staring out into the slipstream. He did not sleep. He simply watched the data streams cascading across his command console. He knew the mathematics of the coming encounter. He knew exactly what they were flying into. When the Vanguard finally dropped out of hyperspace, the Kepler 7 station loomed ahead like a floating city of brass and glass. It was massive, a testament to the wealth and power of the Galactic Council. But the space around it felt wrong. The sensors were too quiet. Killscreen as active Chief Engineer Sarah Jenkins reported from her station. Her fingers flew across holographic interfaces. The internal dampeners are masking our core signature. To the outside universe, we are burning civilian-grade plasma. "Hold our vector," Thorne ordered quietly. "Let them spring the trap." And they did. The transition back to the present moment was brutal. The red emergency lights on the bridge continued to strobe. The timer on the main display was ticking down relentlessly. 9 minutes and 12 seconds. Outside, the 32 hegemony warships tightened their formation. The sheer mass of the alien vessels was causing microfractures in the Vanguard's outer sensor arrays. The enemy flagship, a sprawling dreadnought resembling a massive jagged spearhead, locked its targeting lasers onto the small human transport. Deep inside the hegemony flagship, the atmosphere was vastly different. It was calm, triumphant. Commander Kalar paced the length of his lavishly decorated command deck. He ran a clawed hand over the edge of his tactical display, savoring the geometry of his trap. He had hunted dozens of species in his long career. The pattern was always the same. Arrogance followed by panic followed by total submission. The humans were just the latest pest to infest hegemony space. They had spread too quickly. They needed to be culled. Counselor Vrek sat in a hovering anti-gravity chair, swirling a chalice of luminescent blue liquid. I expected more from them, Vrek sneered, adjusting his silken robes. The reports from the fringe colonies spoke of human stubbornness. Yet they send a pathetic cargo hauler to a diplomatic summit. They are already broken. In the sunken pit of the command deck, bathed in the glow of deep scanning monitors, a low-ranking alien analyst named Kalen stared intently at a stream of anomaly data. His secondary eyes blinked rapidly, trying to process the numbers his console was feeding him. Something was wrong. Fundamentally, physically wrong. Commander Kalen spoke up, his voice trembling slightly in the echoing chamber. I am running a gravimetric scan on the human vessel. The readings are contradictory. Kalar did not look at him. He kept his eyes on the prize outside the viewport. Explain, Kalar growled. The optical sensors confirm a standard Class 4 transport, 214 meters, single hull plating. But the mass shadow, the gravitational displacement is impossible. The object we have surrounded is projecting a mass equivalent to a planetary defense fortress. The density is off the scale. It is as if they have compressed a mountain into a metallic shell. Vrax laughed, a sharp grating sound. Your sensors are picking up ghost echoes from the station's gravity tether analyst. Do not embarrass yourself with primitive miscalculations. The humans do not possess the technology to bend physics. Kalen swallowed hard, his digits hovering over the warning klaxon. But sir, the thermal output is rising. It is not an engine flare. The entire hull is heating up from the inside. They are charging something. Let them charge whatever pitiful lasers they have, Kalar commanded, turning his massive armored back to the analyst. If they fire a single shot, it gives us the legal right to bypass the surrender and turn them into plasma. Keep the timer running. I want to see the ambassador beg when the clock hits 0. Back on the Vanguard, the clock was bleeding down. 7 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes. The silence on the human bridge was absolute. Nobody panicked. Nobody whispered. They were professionals forged in the fires of a grieving planet, waiting for the leash to be taken off. Evelyn watched the timer. 2 minutes. 1 minute. Her mind flashed back to Washington, to the rain, to the stuffed bear in her daughter's arms. She thought of the miners choking on toxic dust in Kepler 9. She thought of the sheer unadulterated arrogance of the creatures waiting outside to enslave her entire species. A cold, terrifying calm settled over her. The fear was gone. Only purpose remained. 30 seconds. Captain Thorne unclasped his hands from behind his back. He stepped forward to the command podium. The dim, emergency lights caught the sharp angles of his face. Jenkins Thorne said softly. His voice cut through the silence like a scalpel. Sir, kill the projection. Drop the shell. With pleasure, Captain. 15 seconds left on the alien timer. In the blackness of space, the tiny battered human transport ship simply ceased to exist. The visual projection, a masterpiece of quantum holography, dissolved into a cloud of shimmering digital static. For a fraction of a second, there was nothing but the dark void. Then the true hull of the Vanguard breached reality. It did not just appear, it unfolded. The ship had been actively compressing its own structural geometry using highly classified dimensional folding technology. Now the restraints were released. Thick, brutal slabs of adaptive neurometallic armor slammed outward, locking into place with a physical shockwave that rippled through the vacuum. Massive structural ribs expanded, stretching the ship's spine. The engines, previously choked down to a fraction of a percent, flared with the blinding, terrible light of a contained dying star. From 214 meters, the ship violently expanded. 500 meters. 1 kilometer. 2 kilometers. It finally locked its configuration at 2,143 meters of pure, unadulterated human wrath. It was a dreadnought, a city killer, a spear of midnight black armor designed with brutalist efficiency. There were no graceful curves, no artistic alien sweeping lines. It was a flying block of heavy metal hatred. Along the flanks of the massive vessel, thousands of heavy armor plates retracted in perfect synchronization. From the mechanical dark rows of spinal-mounted railguns, heavy plasma lances and antimatter torpedo tubes slid out into the cold light of the surrounding stars. The weapons bristled like the quills of a prehistoric predator waking from a deep sleep. A pulse of pure electromagnetic energy violently erupted from the Vanguard's core, washing over the 32 hegemony warships. On the alien flagship, the lights blew out in a shower of sparks. The arrogant smirk vanished from Commander Kalar's face as his tactical screens screamed with fatal proximity warnings. The analyst Kalen was thrown from his seat, screaming over the blaring alarms. Energy output is increasing. 300%, 800%. It is off the scale. The target is locking onto every single vessel in our fleet simultaneously. Vrax gripped the arms of his hovering chair, his blue skin turning a sickly shade of gray. "What is that?" Vrax demanded, staring out the viewport at the metallic titan that now eclipsed the local moon. "By the gods, what is that?" On the bridge of the Vanguard, the red emergency lights had been replaced by a cold, calculating blue. The shaking had stopped. The beast was loose. Evelyn Vance stared out the viewport at the massive hegemony flagship, which suddenly looked very, very small. Captain Thorne leaned over the communication console. He keyed the open frequency to the entire alien fleet. He did not yell. He did not threaten. He spoke with the quiet, devastating authority of an executioner reading a sentence. "Hegemony Fleet, this is the United Earthship Vanguard. Your timer has expired." The transmission from the human dreadnought hung in the dead space between the fleets. It was not a plea. It was not a negotiation. It was a statement of absolute terrifying finality. On the bridge of the Hegemony flagship, the silence was so profound that Commander Kalar could hear the frantic clicking of his analyst's secondary eyelids. Kalar stared at the main optical display. The Vanguard eclipsed the stars. It was a monolithic slab of black metal, radiating an aura of suppressed violence that defied every known law of galactic engineering. A species that had barely figured out rudimentary, faster-than-light travel a century ago had just unfolded a 2-kilometer warship from the shell of a cargo hauler. It was impossible. It was an insult to the natural order of the galaxy. Kalar's shock curdled into a blinding, venomous rage. He slammed his armored fist onto the command console, shattering the crystalline interface. "Obliterate them!" Kalar roared, his voice echoing through the cavernous bridge. "All batteries, maximum yield. Melt that primitive abomination into slag." Across the void, 80 heavy plasma cannons aligned. They glowed with the furious, blinding white heat of captive suns. The vacuum of space offered no sound, but the visual impact was apocalyptic. A torrential downpour of superheated plasma lanced across the dark, converging on the lone human dreadnought. It was a barrage designed to crack a small moon. On the bridge of the Vanguard, the incoming fire painted the faces of the human crew in stark, strobing white. Ambassador Evelyn Vance did not flinch. She watched the death of 1,000 stars rushing toward them. She expected the ship to violently shudder. She expected the deafening roar of failing structural integrity. Instead, there was only a deep, resonant hum. The plasma struck the Vanguard. It did not explode. It did not tear through the hull. "Impact sustained," Chief Engineer Sarah Jenkins reported. Her voice was as calm as a bank teller counting coins. Her fingers danced across a holographic schematic of the ship's armor. "Adaptive molecular plating is engaging. Kinetic and thermal dispersion holding." To the alien fleet, the Vanguard appeared to be engulfed in a furious sphere of localized hellfire. But beneath the inferno, the human ship was not just surviving. It was feeding. "They are using standard thermal kinetic projection," Captain Jenkins continued, her eyes reflecting the data streams. "Our hull lattice is reconfiguring at the subatomic level. Billions of microsensors are analyzing the plasma frequencies and shifting our armor density to match. They aren't breaking our shields, sir. They are charging our capacitors." "Status of the primary reserves?" Captain Gideon Thorne asked, his eyes locked on the raging storm outside. "Capacitors at 140%, 160, 187%. Jenkins read the faintest ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Sir, the shields are gorging. If they keep shooting, we are going to have to vent the excess or risk a power surge in the tertiary drives." Thorne nodded slowly. "Let's not waste their generosity. Route the excess power to the forward magnetic coils. Spool up the spinal railgun. Target the Hegemony sub-flagship on our port side. Coils charging. Target locked. Fire." There was no flashy laser beam. There was no glowing ball of energy. The Vanguard's primary weapon was a monument to the brutal human pragmatism. It was a railgun that spanned the entire 2-kilometer length of the ship, utilizing magnetic fields powerful enough to rip the iron from a man's blood. It fired a solid tungsten-depleted uranium slug at a significant fraction of the speed of light. The ship gave a single massive shudder. The slug crossed the distance between the two fleets in a microsecond. It struck the Hegemony sub-flagship dead center. The alien energy shields designed to dissipate plasma in laser fire simply shattered like spun glass. The kinetic force of the impact was so catastrophic that the alien vessel did not merely explode. It structurally disintegrated. The 800-meter warship snapped in half its internal atmosphere, instantly freezing into a cloud of glittering diamonds as its fusion core detonated, wiping out 2 adjacent Hegemony destroyers in the collateral blast. 3 ships gone, in the blink of an eye. Thorne keyed the open frequency again. "One ship is enough," he whispered into the void. On the Hegemony flagship, the tactical holograms flickered and died as the localized electromagnetic pulse from the railgun washed over them. Kalar staggered backward, his armored boots slipping on the polished deck. "Report!" Kalar screamed, his vocal cords tearing. "What was that? Where did the fire come from?" Analyst Kalen was weeping. Dark, viscous fluid leaked from his secondary eyes. "They fired a solid projectile, Commander. A rock. They accelerated a rock to relativistic speeds. It bypassed our energy dispersion nets entirely. Sir, their shields are not failing. Our barrage is making them stronger." Counselor Vrex clawed at his silken robes, the arrogance entirely drained from his alien features. "Call the reserves, bring them all in. We outnumber them, crush this insect." Kalar keyed his command override. Deep in the sensor shadow of the Kepler 7 asteroid belt, the dark space rippled. 40 more Hegemony heavy destroyers dropped their active camouflage. They poured into the combat zone like a swarm of angry hornets, their engines burning fierce red. 71 warships against 1 human dreadnought. Light years away, in a place devoid of starlight and hope, a different kind of survival was playing out. Kepler 9. The atmosphere of the mining colony was a thick, suffocating soup of orange dust and sulfur. The sun was a bloated red bruise in the sky. Deep in the trench of Sector 4, Sergeant David Miller swung a heavy pneumatic pickaxe into the bedrock. He was stripped to the waist, his skin coated in a thick layer of grime and dry blood. He was 28 years old, a former Marine who had been captured during the initial Hegemony raid 2 years ago. Around him, 4,000 other human beings toiled in the relentless heat. They were emaciated. They were broken. If they stopped swinging, the alien overseers standing on the catwalks above would activate the pain collars locked around their necks. Miller swung again. His muscles screamed. His vision blurred. He thought of Earth. He thought of cold rain and green grass. He used those memories to fuel the next swing. It was the only way to stay sane. Suddenly, the rhythmic metallic crunch of thousands of pickaxes was interrupted by a sharp electronic whine. Miller paused, wiping the toxic sweat from his eyes. He looked up. On the catwalks, the Hegemony overseers were in a state of absolute panic. They were towering creatures, usually stoic and cruel, but now they were running. They were screaming into their communication gauntlets, their voices high-pitched and frantic. One of the overseers dropped his shock rifle. It clattered against the iron grating. He didn't even bother to pick it up. He just kept running toward the heavily fortified command bunker. The air sirens across the mining camp began to wail. It was not the low droning sound that signaled a shift change. It was a rapid, high-frequency shriek. It was the planetary defense alarm. Miller dropped his pickaxe. Beside him, an older man named Harris coughed, leaning on his tool. "What is it, Kit? An earthquake?" Miller stared at the sky. The bloated red sun was being obscured by something massive entering the upper atmosphere. The clouds were parting in violent circular shockwaves. "No," Miller breathed, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He felt a sudden electric surge of adrenaline. He recognized that entry pattern. He recognized the shape of the thermal trails. "That's not an earthquake, Harris. That's a planetary breach." Miller looked at the panicked alien guards. He looked at the discarded shock rifle on the catwalk. A dangerous feral grin spread across his grime-streaked face. "They're coming for us." Back in the Kepler-7 sector, the void was a chaotic tapestry of laser fire and engine trails. 71 hegemony warships were swarming the Vanguard, unleashing a relentless, coordinated bombardment. The human dreadnought sat in the center of the maelstrom like an immovable mountain. "Hull temperature is rising, Captain," Jenkins reported, her fingers flying over the haptic controls. "Adaptive lattice is holding, but the sheer volume of fire is creating localized thermal spikes. We are taking superficial damage to the outer sensor arrays." "Keep the bow pointed directly at their flagship," Thorne ordered. He was not sweating. He watched the tactical display with the detached calculation of a grandmaster moving pieces on a board. "Let them group up. Let them think they have us pinned." Ambassador Vance stood by the railing, her hands gripping the metal tightly. "Gideon, they have 70 ships. We cannot absorb this forever." "We don't have to, Evelyn," Thorne replied softly. "We just needed them to commit their reserves." Thorne turned to his tactical officer. "Deploy the Ghost Swarm. Pattern Alpha." Beneath the heavy armor plating of the Vanguard's lower hull, hundreds of small, seamless hatches slid open. They did not fire outward with a flash of light or a burst of propellant. They simply dropped into the void. 500 stealth drones, and they were small, completely black, and shaped like jagged arrowheads. They emitted no heat. They registered on no radar. They were invisible to every spectrum of hegemony sensors. They moved with the terrifying synchronized intelligence of a hive mind. "Sir," Kalen shouted from his pit on the alien flagship, his voice cracking with hysteria. "The human ship. It just vented mass. I am reading a sudden drop in their internal density, but there is nothing on the optical, nothing on the thermal." "Ignore it," Kaler roared. "Maintain the barrage, crack that shell." Kaler's arrogance was his epitaph. The ghost drones bypassed the hegemony energy shields as if they did not exist. They latched onto the hulls of the surrounding alien destroyers like metallic parasites. Once attached, they deployed focused plasma torches, cutting directly through the armor plating and plunging deep into the critical engineering arteries of the enemy ships. The results were instantaneous and devastating. On the far right flank, a hegemony cruiser suddenly went dark. Its engines died. Its weapons powered down. It began a slow, helpless drift into the path of its own allies. Then another went dark. Then 3 more. "Commander," Kalen shrieked, "the 7th Fleet is experiencing catastrophic system failures. Main power is offline. Life support is venting. They are completely paralyzed." "Who is shooting them?" Kalar demanded, slamming his fist on the console. "Where is the fire coming from, Disha?" "There is no fire. There is nothing there. They are just dying." In the span of 45 seconds, 18 hegemony warships were completely disabled. They hung in space like dead whales, their crews trapped in darkness, suffocating as life support systems were surgically dismantled from the outside. The human technology was not just superior, it was operating on a level of warfare the hegemony could not even comprehend. Panic, pure and unfiltered, finally took hold of Commander Kalar. His grand trap had become a slaughterhouse, and he was the cattle. He looked at the remaining 50-odd ships in his fleet. They were breaking formation, trying to put distance between themselves and the terrifying human Leviathan. "Do not retreat," Kalar bellowed, his voice broadcasting across the surviving fleet. "Form a wedge, converge on the target. We will crush them with sheer mass, ramming speed." Down in the sensor pit, Kalen stood up. He defied his commander for the first and last time in his life. "No, Commander, you cannot do that. If we compress our formation, we limit our firing arcs. We trap ourselves." "Execute the order, or I will execute you, Kalei," Kalar screamed. The massive hegemony warships painfully realigned. They formed a massive triangular spearhead engines, burning at maximum output, driving directly toward the Vanguard. Millions of tons of alien metal hurtling forward to crush the human ship between them. Captain Thorne watched the massive wedge formation approaching. He did not order evasive maneuvers. He did not order a retreat. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on the enemy flagship at the center of the wedge. "They want to close the distance," Thorne said, a predatory edge creeping into his voice. "Let's oblige them. Execute the Custer Protocol." Chief Engineer Jenkins didn't hesitate. Disengaging safety limiters on the main drives. Rerouting all absorbed shield energy directly into the propulsion manifold. "Hold on to something. The Vanguard did not just accelerate, it violently tore a hole in the fabric of local space. The 2-kilometer-long mass of black armor surged forward with a speed that defied its own colossal weight. It did not try to flank the hegemony wedge. It drove straight down their throats. "They are charging!" Kalar screamed in disbelief. "Fire, fire, everything!" But the alien ships were too close together. As the Vanguard plunged into the center of their formation, the hegemony warships panicked. They fired their heavy plasma cannons, but the Vanguard was moving too fast. The massive blasts of alien energy missed the black hull and slammed into their own ships on the opposite side of the formation. Friendly fire tore through the hegemony ranks. Cruisers gutted their own destroyers. The Vanguard became a wolf inside a sheep pen. It did not need to use its main railgun. It utilized point-blank lateral batteries, firing heavy depleted uranium shells directly into the exposed bellies of the alien ships at point-blank range. The void lit up with a chain reaction of catastrophic explosions. The Vanguard tore through the hegemony flagship's escorts, leaving a trail of shattered hulls and frozen atmosphere in its wake. On the bridge of the Vanguard, the inertial dampeners whined as the ship violently maneuvered through the debris field of its own making. Thorne stood tall, perfectly balanced, amidst the shaking of the deck. He reached for the master communication suite. He overrode the localized scrambling codes and broadcasted his voice on every known hegemony frequency, not just to the ships, to their homeworlds, to their colonies, to the Galactic Council itself. "For 50 years you looked at humanity and saw prey." Thorne's voice echoed across the stars, deep and cold. "You burned our outposts. You stole our people. You thought we were weak because we sued for peace." On the hegemony flagship, the bridge was on fire. Sparks rained down from the ceiling. Kalar was bleeding from a shrapnel wound to his shoulder. He stared at the audio speakers as the human's voice filled the room. "We did not sue for peace because we were afraid." Thorne continued, his voice a hammer falling on an anvil. "We sued for peace to buy time. We spent 10 years in the dark. We stripped our moons for armor. We bled our oceans for fuel. We built our nightmares into reality." Thorne paused. The silence was heavier than the gunfire. "You brought 30 ships to threaten an ambassador. Let me show you what humanity brings to a war." Deep in the command center of the Pentagon, President Sterling gave a single nod. Across the galaxy, the dark space violently erupted. The tactical holograms on the hegemony flagship, struggling to stay online, suddenly exploded with hundreds of new contacts. "Commander," Kalen sobbed, staring at a screen that was painted entirely in hostile red markers. "It's not just one ship by the gods, it's not just one. Above the hegemony capital world of Prime, above the shipyard rings of Vocanth, above every major military installation the aliens possessed, 57 human dreadnoughts dropped their active camouflage simultaneously. 57 massive black jagged spears of human engineering appeared in the skies of the alien empire. They did not fire a single shot. They simply hung there in the upper atmospheres, blocking out the suns, casting terrifying shadows over the alien cities. It was a checkmate delivered on a galactic scale, and on Kepler 9 the sky was falling. David Miller stood in the toxic dirt watching the atmosphere burn. The alien overseers were scattering like insects, their weapons forgotten, their arrogance shattered by the screaming descent of human drop pods. The sky above the mining colony was filled with fiery streaks of entry trails. Thousands of heavily armored orbital drop pods slammed into the perimeter of the labor camp, throwing up massive geysers of red dirt and shattered rock. Before the dust could even settle, the heavy explosive bolts on the pods blew outward. Humanity's most elite ground forces, the orbital drop shock troopers, poured out of the smoke. They were encased in heavy-powered armor, their visors glowing with a sinister crimson light. They did not yell. They did not hesitate. They moved with the exact same terrifying, lethal precision as the Vanguard. A hegemony overseer, panicking, raised a plasma pistol toward the advancing line of human soldiers. He didn't even get to pull the trigger. 3 heavy-caliber explosive rounds tore through his biological armor, throwing his massive body backward into the mud. Miller watched as a squad of heavily armed humans sprinted past him, moving to secure the command bunker. One of the soldiers, a giant of a man in scarred power armor, stopped. He looked down at Miller. He looked at the pain collar secured around Miller's neck. The soldier reached out with a massive gauntleted hand and gripped the heavy iron lock of the collar. The servos in his armor whined. With a brutal twist, he snapped the alien metal like it was made of cheap plastic. The collar fell into the dirt. Miller took his first full deep breath in 2 years. The soldier reached up and unsealed his helmet, pulling it off. He had a rough, scarred face and eyes that held the same cold fire Miller had seen in his own reflection. "Sergeant Miller," the soldier asked, his voice rough with dust and adrenaline. Miller could only nod, his throat-tight tears cutting clean lines through the grime on his face. The soldier smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing. "Pack your gear, Marine," the soldier said, extending a hand to pull Miller up. "We're going home." Back in the Kepler 7 sector, the battle was over. There was no grand finale. There was no final glorious explosion. There was only the graveyard. Of the 71 hegemony warships that had answered the call, only 9 remained intact. They drifted aimlessly through the wreckage of their own fleet. Their engines were dead. Their weapons were offline. They were floating tombs waiting for the killing blow. On the bridge of the Vanguard, the blue tactical lights hummed peacefully. The ship had not taken a single breach to its inner hull. "Main batteries are cooled, Captain," Jenkins reported softly. "Targeting locks are secured on the remaining 9 vessels, including the enemy flagship. They are dead in the water. We can vaporize them on your command." Ambassador Vance stepped up beside Thorne. She looked out at the drifting, ruined husks of the alien ships. She remembered the threat Counselor Vrex had made just an hour ago. She remembered the timer. "They would have killed us all," Evelyn said, her voice barely a whisper. "They wouldn't have hesitated." Thorne stared at the hegemony flagship. He could see the structural damage. He knew that inside that metal shell, Commander Kalar was waiting for the end. He knew that with a single word, he could wipe the last remnants of the alien pride from the universe. He thought of his parents burning at Proxima. The anger, cold and sharp, flared in his chest. Thorne reached for the communication console. He locked his eyes on the broken flagship. "Stand down weapons," Thorne ordered. Jenkins paused, her hands hovering over the firing controls. She looked at him, surprised. "Sir." "I said stand down weapons, Chief," Thorne repeated, his voice resolute. "Disengage targeting locks." Evelyn turned to him, her eyes wide. "Gideon, why?" Thorne did not look away from the void. "Because if we pull the trigger now, we prove them right. We prove that we are just another pack of rabid dogs fighting over scraps in the dark." He leaned into the microphone, broadcasting directly to the crippled hegemony flagship. "Commander Kalar, this is Captain Thorne." On the ruined bridge of the flagship, Kalar sat slumped against a sparking console. He was bleeding heavily. He closed his eyes, waiting for the flash of light that would end his life. "I am leaving your life support systems active," Thorne's voice echoed through the smoke-filled room. "I am leaving your distress beacons online. Your council will come and tow you back to whatever rock you crawled out from." Kalar opened his eyes, stunned. "We are the apex predators of our world," Thorne said, and the absolute certainty in his voice chilled Kalar to the bone. "We spent thousands of years hunting monsters in the dark until we became the only monsters left. But we do not slaughter the helpless. We do not enslave the weak." Thorne stood up straight, adjusting the collar of his black uniform. "Take this message back to your galactic council. Earth is no longer requesting a seat at your table. We are building our own table. And if you ever cross into our space again, if you ever threaten another human life, we will not stop at your fleets. We will take your stars." Thorne cut the feed. He turned to his helmsman. "Bring us around. Set coordinates for the hegemony capital prime. Let's finish this." The Vanguard slowly turned, its massive engines flaring with a brilliant, clean blue light. It did not hurry. It moved with the majestic, unhurried grace of a king leaving a conquered battlefield. It slipped into hyperspace, leaving the broken hegemony fleet to drift in the cold, silent dark, and headed straight for the heart of the enemy empire. Hours later, the emergency session of the Galactic Council on Nexus Prime was a scene of absolute unbridled chaos. The massive amphitheater, designed to hold the representatives of 100 species, was echoing with panicked shouts. The hologram of the destroyed hegemony fleet was rotating in the center of the room, a ghostly monument to a catastrophic miscalculation. Counselor Vrex stood at the central podium. He had been evacuated from the Kepler 7 station hours ago. His fine silken robes were rumpled. He looked old. He looked terrified. They possess numbers we cannot calculate. Vrex stammered, his voice echoing over the shouting delegates. They have dreadnoughts parked above all of our core worlds. They have liberated the Kepler-9 labor camps in a matter of minutes. The hegemony military has been effectively neutralized. A tall insectoid representative from the Valerie system stood up, its mandibles clicking furiously. This is an invasion. The humans are conquering the galaxy. We must mobilize all remaining forces. No, a quiet voice cut through the shouting. It was Kalen, the lowly analyst. He had been brought before the council to provide the tactical data. He stood in the center of the room, looking around at the panicked politicians. They are not invading, Kalen said softly. If they wanted to conquer us, we would already be dead. They had the hegemony fleet entirely at their mercy. They could have vaporized us. They chose to let us live. The room fell into a stunned, uneasy silence. They disabled our ships. They freed their people. And then they left. Kalen continued, pulling up a new data stream. But they left a broadcast echoing on the subspace frequencies. He played the recording. It was the voice of Admiral Cassandra Steele broadcasting from Earth. To the citizens of the galaxy, humanity is officially withdrawing from the Galactic Council's authority. We have formed our own alliance, an alliance built on mutual respect, not subjugation. Any species currently suffering under the oppression of the hegemony, any species that wishes to live without fear, is invited to seek protection under our flag. The borders of Earth space are open to you. The recording ended. The silence in the council chamber was deafening. The politicians looked at each other, realizing the sheer magnitude of what had just happened. The Valari representative slowly sat down. The representative of the Zynthian colonies, a species that had been forced to pay crippling tributes to the hegemony for decades, stood up. The Zynthian colonies. The representative spoke, its voice trembling but resolute. We formally request immediate asylum within the human alliance. Before Vrex could even protest, the representative of the Krellian mining worlds stood up as well. The Krellian worlds request asylum. One by one, 6 minor species, the underclass of the Galactic Society, stood up and turned their backs on the council. They walked out of the chamber, heading for the communication relays to contact Earth. Vrex watched them go. He realized with a sinking, hollow feeling in his chest that the hegemony's reign of terror was over. The humans hadn't just defeated their military. They had shattered their empire without firing a single shot at a civilian world. They had won the moral war. The sky above the hegemony capital world of Prime had been a pristine, unbroken blue for 10,000 years. It was a sky that had never known the shadow of a foreign invader. It was a sky that belonged to conquerors. On this day, the sky was dead. It was blocked out by 57 United Earthship dreadnoughts, over 120,000 cumulative meters of adaptive neurometallic armor hung in the upper atmosphere, positioned in a perfect, suffocating grid. They did not move. They did not fire a single warning shot. They simply existed, massive and black, eclipsing the twin suns of Prime. Down on the surface, 12 billion alien citizens stood in the streets of their sprawling golden cities. They did not scream. They did not riot. They stared up in absolute paralyzing terror. For 50 years, the hegemony propaganda machine had broadcasted endless victories over primitive, fragile species. The humans were supposed to be the latest acquisition, a stubborn but easily broken race of flesh and bone. Now the primitive species was parked above their homes. The sheer gravitational displacement of the human armada was causing the oceans of Prime to recede. It was an apocalyptic display of raw, unapologetic power. Deep inside the planetary defense bunker, miles beneath the Golden Capital, the atmosphere was thick with the stench of ozone and pheromonal panic. Analyst Kalen stood trembling before the central holographic table. He had just returned on an emergency shuttle from the catastrophic defeat at Kepler-7. He was one of the few survivors. Commander Kalar had been left drifting in his ruined flagship, stripped of his fleet, his pride, and his mind. The high command of the hegemony surrounded Kalen. They were massive, heavily armored generals who had never lost a campaign in their centuries of life. Now their armor looked like cheap tin. "Why are they not firing?" demanded High General Vral, his secondary eyes twitching erratically. "They have bypassed our orbital defense grids as if they were made of paper. They have weapons capable of cracking the mantle of this planet. Why is the sky not burning?" Kalen looked at the holographic projection of the human dreadnoughts. The red threat markers were flashing, but the energy readouts from the human ships were completely stable. They were not charging their weapons. Because they want us to look at them, Kalen whispered. The truth of it tasted like ash in his mouth. General, they are not here to exterminate us. Extermination is a mercy compared to this. They are executing a psychological decapitation. They are showing 12 billion of our citizens that the hegemony military is completely fundamentally powerless. Preposterous, Vral roared, slamming his fists onto the table. They are a young species. They do not have the logistical capability to maintain a siege of this magnitude. We still have the Omega Protocol. Kalen's blood ran cold. The Omega Protocol. It was a remnant from a forgotten war, a subterranean subspace singularity cannon built into the very core of Prime. It was designed as a mutually assured destruction failsafe. If fired, it would tear a hole in subspace, bypassing all physical defenses and detonate a singularity directly inside the Sol system. It would swallow Earth whole, but the energy required to fire it would fracture Prime's tectonic plates. It would kill billions of their own people in the process. General, you cannot, Kalen pleaded, stepping forward. If you activate the Omega sequence, the earthquakes will level the capital. And the humans are arrogant. Vral snarled, his eyes burning with the madness of a cornered beast. They spared our flagship. They parked their fleet in our atmosphere to gloat. They think they have won because they understand kinetic shielding, but they do not understand subspace warfare. They have left their homeworld exposed. Vral turned to his tactical officers. Initiate the Omega sequence. Target the human star. Let them watch their precious Earth collapse into a black hole. Alarms began to scream deep within the bedrock of the planet. The lights in the bunker flickered to a dark, angry crimson. The ground beneath their feet began to vibrate. It was a low, terrifying rumble that built into a deafening roar as ancient, forbidden machinery came to life. On the central screen, a countdown appeared. 2 minutes to singularity ignition. They brought 57 ships to our world. Vral whispered, a manic grin spreading across his face. We only need one shot to end theirs. Hundreds of miles above, in the silent, cold bridge of the U.S. Vanguard, Captain Gideon Thorne stood motionless. He was looking down at the golden, sprawling cities of Prime. Captain Chief Engineer Sarah Jenkins spoke. Her voice broke the absolute silence of the bridge. It was not a voice of panic. It was a voice of mild, professional curiosity. Report, Chief, Thorne said, not taking his eyes off the planet. Sensors are detecting a massive seismic anomaly near the planetary core. Deep crust thermal venting is spiking by 4,000%. There is a subspace spatial distortion forming directly beneath the capital city. They are spinning up a singularity weapon, sir. Ambassador Evelyn Vance, who had stayed aboard the Vanguard to witness the surrender, felt her heart drop. A singularity weapon, can it reach Earth? If it fires, yes, Ambassador, Jenkins replied, her fingers dancing across the haptic keyboard. It bypasses linear space entirely. It would detonate inside our sun in approximately 3 seconds after launch. Evelyn looked at Thorne. Her hands tightened into fists. Gideon, they're trying to wipe us out. Right now, while we are trying to spare them. Thorne's expression did not change. The cold void in his eyes simply deepened. He looked at the timer counting down on Jenkins' screen. 90 seconds. Should I order the fleet to commence orbital bombardment, sir? Jenkins asked. We can crack the crust and destroy the weapon before it fires, but the civilian casualties will be in the billions. No, Thorne said quietly. Evelyn stared at him. Gideon, they are going to destroy Earth. No, Evelyn, they aren't. Thorne stepped down from the command podium and walked slowly toward the engineering station. Chief Jenkins, do you remember the data packet we uploaded into the Kepler-7 station's mainframe during the battle? Jenkins smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. The Trojan sequence, sir, yes. It piggybacked on the hegemony's encrypted emergency distress signals when their fleet was destroyed. It has already infiltrated the planetary defense grid on Prime. They think we spent the last 10 years only building heavy armor, Thorne said, his voice a low rumble. They don't understand that humanity fought our most brutal wars in the digital dark long before we ever reached the stars. 60 seconds. Down in the hegemony bunker, the floor was shaking violently. Dust fell from the ceiling. General Vral watched the energy bars on the screen fill with blinding white light. 50 seconds to ignition, a tactical officer shouted over the deafening roar of the subterranean machinery. Subspace tear is forming, trajectory locked on the Sol system. Kalen squeezed his eyes shut. He was waiting for the end of everything. 40 seconds. On the Vanguard. Thorne looked at Jenkins. Shut it down, Chief. Executing override, Jenkins said. She hit a single holographic keystroke. In the hegemony bunker, the deafening roar of the singularity weapon suddenly flatlined. The vibration in the floor stopped. The blinding white light on the tactical screens vanished, replaced by an ocean of dead black pixels. The emergency crimson lights flickered and died. The bunker was plunged into absolute darkness, save for the pale emergency glow of the central holographic table. General Vral froze. The manic grin melted from his face. What happened? Did it fire? No, General, a terrified voice called out from the dark. The system is gone. Gone? What do you mean gone? Reroute the power manually, override the dampeners. General, you don't understand. The code isn't just failing, it's being rewritten. Something is inside our mainframe. It's tearing through the firewalls at a speed we can't even measure. It's deleting the launch algorithms. It's locking the physical blast doors. Suddenly, the central holographic table flared to life. It did not show the hegemony crest. It did not show the tactical map of the galaxy. It showed a single blinking line of human text translated perfectly into the hegemony dialect. Access denied. Do not try that again. General Vral stared at the glowing words. For the first time in his centuries of life, the High General of the hegemony fell to his knees. His armor clattered against the stone floor. The realization crashed into him with the weight of a dying star. The humans had not just outgunned them, they had outthought them. They had infiltrated the most secure military network in the galaxy from light years away, completely undetected, and disarmed a doomsday weapon with a single keystroke. They were gods playing with insects. They knew, Kalen whispered into the silence of the dark bunker. They knew we had it, and they let us try to use it just to show us that we couldn't. Back on the Vanguard, Thorne turned away from the console. Weapon disabled, Captain, Jenkins reported. The hegemony mainframe is entirely under our control. I have locked their planetary defense grids, grounded their remaining aerospace fighters, and disabled their long-range communication relays. They are officially deaf, dumb, and blind. Good, Thorne said. Leave the fleet in orbit for another 24 hours. Let them look at the sky. Let them truly understand what they survived. Then bring the ships home. While the hegemony capital learned the bitter taste of total defeat, a different kind of reality was unfolding on the edge of the galaxy. Light years away, the UES Liberator, a massive hospital ship the size of a floating city, hung in the quiet space near the Kepler system. Inside the pristine, brightly lit medical bays, the silence was broken by the sound of weeping. It was not the weeping of pain, but the overwhelming, shattering release of 4,000 human souls, realizing they were safe. Sergeant David Miller sat on the edge of a white medical bed. He was clean. The toxic orange dust of Kepler-9 had been scrubbed from his skin. The deep cuts from the alien whips had been sealed with biofoam. The heavy iron pain collar was gone, leaving only a dark bruise around his neck. He stared at his hands. They were trembling. For 2 years, he had been nothing but a number, a biological machine meant to swing a pickaxe until his heart gave out. He had forgotten what clean air tasted like. He had forgotten the softness of a cotton sheet. A human nurse, a young woman with kind eyes, gently placed a tray of warm food in front of him. Real food, not the synthetic, tasteless protein paste the aliens had fed them. There was a bowl of hot soup, fresh bread, a cup of coffee that smelled like a morning back in Colorado. Take it slow, Sergeant, the nurse said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. Your stomach needs time to adjust. Miller looked up at her. He tried to speak, but his throat seized. He just nodded, tears welling in his eyes, blurring his vision. Across the medical bay, the older man Harris was holding a localized communication pad. He was looking at a screen, his hands shaking violently. Sarah, Harris choked out, staring at the digital face of his wife, who was sitting in a living room back on Earth, crying uncontrollably. Sarah, I'm here. I'm coming home. The boys, did the boys get big? Miller listened to the voices filling the massive room. Wives talking to husbands. Mothers seeing children they thought were dead. The sheer overwhelming humanity of the moment was heavier than any alien gravity. A heavy set of footsteps echoed down the corridor. The chatter in the medical bay slowly died down. Miller looked up. Walking down the center aisle was a man in the black and silver uniform of the United Earth Space Command. He moved with absolute authority, but his eyes were entirely focused on the survivors. It was Admiral Vance's second-in-command, General Marcus Holt. Holt stopped in the center of the room. He looked around at the bruised, battered, but living faces of the colonists. He looked at Miller. He looked at Harris. Holt snapped to attention. He raised his right hand in a sharp, perfect salute. On behalf of the United Earth Government and the people of the home system, Holt's voice rang out thick with emotion. Welcome back to the Alliance. You are safe. Nobody will ever touch you again. That is a promise written in the ashes of the enemy. Miller slowly stood up. His legs were weak, but his spine was straight. He returned the salute to what? Around the room, one by one, the broken miners, the starving colonists, the men and women who had endured the darkest hell the galaxy had to offer stood up. They saluted the uniform that had torn the sky open to save them. They were human. They had been pushed to the absolute edge of extinction, and they had pushed back. 6 months later, the galactic map did not look the same. The old borders drawn in the blood of subjugated species by the hegemony had been erased. A massive glowing blue perimeter now dominated the Orion arm of the galaxy. It was the border of the newly established human alliance. It was a border unlike any other in galactic history. It was not maintained by threats or tribute. It was maintained by a network of deep space sensor buoys and heavily armored orbital defense platforms. It was a fortress of light in the dark. Inside that border, a miracle of logistics and empathy was taking place. The minor species, the Valari, the Krellians, the Zynthians, had abandoned the rotting bureaucracy of the Galactic Council. They had sent their refugee fleets by the thousands seeking the promised protection of the human race. They had arrived at the borders of Earth space expecting to be treated as second-class citizens. They expected to be put to work in human mines to pay off their debt for protection. It was all they had ever known. Instead, they were met by human engineering fleets. Earth did not enslave them. Earth built for them. Massive automated human factory ships deployed in the dead systems near the border, harvesting asteroid belts and dead moons. In a matter of months, human engineers constructed massive spinning orbital habitats. They built agricultural domes designed specifically for the atmospheric needs of the alien refugees. They provided them with clean fusion power medical technology and the right to govern themselves. The humans asked for nothing in return, only a vow of mutual defense and a promise to never inflict the horrors of the past upon anyone else. On the neutral station of Prime Alpha, the remnants of the Galactic Council sat in a largely empty chamber. Counselor Vrex, now stripped of his wealth and his arrogance, stared at the updated galactic map. The hegemony was a fractured, terrified shadow of its former self, quarantined to a handful of core worlds, completely paralyzed by the fear of the black ships returning. "We miscalculated," Vrex whispered to the few remaining delegates. The room was silent. "We looked at their history. We saw their nuclear wars, their tribal conflicts, their capacity for absolute terrifying violence against their own kind." Vrex looked at a holographic image of a human medic treating a Krellian child on one of the new orbital habitats. "We thought that because they knew how to destroy, they would be exactly like us, conquerors, slavers." Vrex shook his head, his blue skin pale and drawn. "We failed to understand the paradox of the human condition." A young human diplomat sitting quietly in the back of the room stood up. He adjusted his suit and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the massive empty chamber. Before he reached the door, Vrex called out to him. "Tell me," the alien counselor asked, his voice trembling, How can a species possess weapons that defy the laws of physics, ships that can murder entire fleets in minutes, and yet choose to build homes for the weak? What are you?" The human diplomat paused. He did not turn around immediately. He looked down at the floor, thinking of the long, bloody history of his world. He thought of the trenches, the atomic fires, the centuries of suffering it took for humanity to finally learn the hardest lesson of all. He turned his head slightly, looking back at the defeated aliens. "We are survivors," the diplomat said softly. "And for thousands of years, the only thing we had to survive was each other. We built our weapons because we know exactly how dark the universe can be. We know what monsters look like. He opened the heavy chamber door. The light from the hallway spilled into the dark room. We decided a long time ago, the diplomat finished, his voice steady and absolute, that we were tired of being the monsters, and we will not tolerate anyone else trying to take the job. He walked out, leaving the door open behind him. The galaxy had changed forever. The age of empires of subjugation and fear was over. In its place stood the human alliance. A shield forged in the fires of a grieving planet held by a species that had looked into the abyss, conquered it, and decided to build a house on its edge. Back on Earth, it was morning in Washington, D.C. The rain had stopped. The sun was breaking through the clouds, casting a golden light over the monuments and the Potomac River. Evelyn Vance walked up the driveway of her suburban home. She looked tired, her uniform slightly rumpled, but there was a profound peace in her eyes. She opened the front door. Her 7-year-old daughter was sitting on the living room floor watching the morning cartoons, her stuffed bear sitting beside her. The little girl turned around, her eyes lit up. "Mommy!" She jumped up and ran across the room. Evelyn dropped her bags and caught her daughter holding her tightly, burying her face in the child's hair. She smelled like strawberries in sleep. "You're home early," the little girl said, wrapping her arms around Evelyn's neck. "Did you finish your work trip?" Evelyn smiled, a real, genuine smile. She looked out the window past the green trees, up into the infinite blue sky. She knew that beyond that blue, the black void was no longer a place of fear. It was a place where humanity walked as giants. "Yes, sweetie," Evelyn whispered, holding her daughter close. "I finished my work. The sky is safe now. It's perfectly safe." The universe had knocked on Earth's door expecting a shuttle. They had expected easy prey. They had expected victims. They had forgotten that the most dangerous creature in the dark is not the one with the sharpest teeth. It is the one that knows exactly when to keep its teeth hidden and when to bite. Humanity had not just survived the night. The dawn had arrived, and it wore the colors of Earth.